What's up, everybody? Welcome to Team Thick Daddy Duelist. Today we're wanting to bring you a video talking about some predictions for the upcoming January Forbidden and Limited list that'll be coming out probably in the next week and a half or 2 weeks. If you've been, if you know a little bit about Yu-Gi-Oh, then you know that they do this every quarter. Our last one happened about the middle of October. Konami has told us that this one will happen no sooner than January 13th, which at the time of recording this video is about a week and a half or so. Um, so, anyway, they've been pretty much on top of it in regards to it coming out pretty close to that date. So it's reasonable to think that in a week and a half, 2 weeks, we'll have a new ban list, which will update our new format for January 2020. So what we want to do today is look at some of the top decks, top 4 or 5 decks, look at some potential targets, talk about what might happen, just kind of our predictions here at TTD. And then talk about some other cards that are maybe a little bit more generic and how they might be impacted in this January 2020 list. So let's go ahead and start talking about the first of our major decks, being Orkest. So if you've paid attention to recent Pro Play Tours, YCSs, Orkest has been a deck that has been around for a good while, but in recent months has been clearly the top deck. It's not really close at all. Sometimes mostly pure, but a lot of variants as well. And Orkest has been making up usually between 25 and 50% of the top cut decks at those events. So we don't see a deck that usually has this high of representation without there being some sort of hit on it. And with it being this high, usually we're probably seeing something pretty heavy. In October, they had a hit of sorts with Nightmare Mermaid being banned, but that's not something that slowed them down too much. That happened, and they came the clear top deck still after that point. So we're probably going to see a hit that's pretty heavy with Orkest in this upcoming January 2020 format. So some things that are potential targets from the Forbidden and Limited list would be, of course, Orchestrated Babel, probably being the clearest and most likely hit. That card will probably get banned, in my opinion. It does too much for the deck, and so that's probably the best hit that they could make. There's a few other cards they could hit, and since it is such a high majority of the meta right now, they could make more than one hit. Galatea is a potential hit as well. I think those are the most two likely hits. However, if they chose to do a different direction, some other things like Harp Horror, Symbol Skeleton, those are all potential targets as well. But in my opinion, I think we're going to see a ban on Babel, and then if they go a little harder, probably Galatea is the next hit. Some people have talked about Dingirsu. Dingirsu is a pretty generically good card, but it's not really anything that's running rampant. It's not the problem with the deck. So since it's kind of like that generic anime boss monster, it'll probably stay and probably be just fine. Not to mention it was really released relatively recently as well. So then let's look at the next of these top decks with Sky Striker. Sky Striker, in my opinion, is a huge problem. It has been a top deck for going into 2 years now. And the problem with January 2020's ban list is that Striker's not going to get hit that hard. Ignition Assault is a new set that's coming out in January that has Striker support. They need to be able to sell those cards so they're not going to kill the deck. Probably what will happen is a card like Hornet Drones will get banned because there's a card in Ignition Assault that does something similar. So the hit to the deck's going to be pretty negligible, meaning that Sky Striker's probably still going to be pretty close to the top of competitive play, at least for the time being. If they wanted to hit it harder, of course, Engage would be the card to hit. You can limit it, you can semi-limit it, but up until this point, I think since Konami still has to sell cards in Ignition Assault, that deck's staying the same. Okay, let's move on now to Salamangreat. This is a deck that some people want hit. I personally, and again, it's just bias, don't want the deck to get hit, but let's talk about some things that could be targeted. I'm going to say that this deck's pretty unlikely to get anything too heavy because it's not making up a large chunk of the meta right now. It's not topping most events. Occasionally we'll see something, maybe a top 3, but usually, you know, the deck is not topping much. So if they're going to do it, I think the most likely hit would be a card like Will of the Salamangreat, which basically acts as a Monster Reborn. It's a continuous spell for Salamangreat monsters. So every turn, you can recur a monster. That's pretty dangerous. You know, a few months ago, people were really only playing one of that card. Now some people are playing 2 or 3, and you know, if you've got 2 or 3 in the deck, then you've got a good chance of seeing it. So a card like Will of the Salamangreat makes sense as a potential hit. Another potential hit I could see is Spinny. Spinny is obviously one of those key components of the deck because it goes to the graveyard, it comes back. There's ways around actually having to banish it after that. And so Spinny is a card that could see some kind of a hit. Since it's a key piece of the deck, I don't know if that'll happen, but it very well could. If they did Spinny, I could see maybe a semi-limit. I don't really like semi-limits personally, but it could happen. The thing is, if they do that, then people are probably going to start relying on a card like Sea Archiver more, because it does pretty similar effects. The only thing is you can't use it with that Key Gazelle combo. So I don't think Spinny will outright get banned. Maybe a semi-limit. I think even limit would be too much, but we'll see. Some people have talked about Bale Links potentially being limited to 1. That's kind of a key thing with how Salamangreat works is you do one, you reincarnate Link the other one. If they limit it, then you're stopping that card's ability. It wouldn't be as bad as if it was like Sunlight Wolf or something. So Bale Links could get limited, but I don't necessarily think that's something that will happen. I think Will and Spinny are the most likely targets in that deck build. Some other things kind of counter to that would be some things that would make the deck a little bit more consistent. I don't necessarily think this will happen because, you know, that was kind of why they hit it back in July. But I could see a card like Lady Debug, which back before April's ban list, people were playing 3 of, because it was essentially the same as Gazelle to some degree, being maybe semi-limited, because since we're having this update to Master Rule 4 coming out in April, there's going to be new decks that are going to be viable. And Lady Debug does help Salamangreat, certainly, but it also could be a more generic help to other Cyberse decks that might try to become, you know, viable as well after this update. Another option would be maybe a card like Salamangreat Circle becoming semi-limited. It's currently limited, and so if you semi-limit Circle, that makes the deck more consistent. The only reason I say this might happen is because of what the OCG just did on their list. We do have a trend of sometimes following what the OCG does, so I think it might happen. But the reason I am a little skeptical is because what was happening was in the OCG they had 3 of them. And then they did this to kind of hurt the deck or make it a little bit less consistent. We only have 1, so it seems unlikely that we go to 2 from 1 when that's what they're doing is trying to kind of hurt the consistency of the deck. Possible, but maybe a little bit unlikely. Okay, the 4th deck we're going to talk about today is Thunder Dragon. Thunder Dragon will probably be the clear front runner if Orkest and Sky Striker gets hurt. So some people expect maybe a slight hit to Thunder Dragon to maybe make it not so clearly above everything else, but you know, maybe still some competition towards the top. So if this happens, we're probably looking at a card like Colossus maybe getting limited. This isn't a super drastic hit, honestly, because you know, Colossus is a super restrictive card, so I could see that being the target, but even if you only have 1, you still have 1. It's not hard to get out. Then you still have your big boss with Titan, and I don't see any hit happening on Titan, so that deck is probably going to see maybe that happen. A card like Hawk, one of the main combo pieces, could get hit to some degree, maybe a limit, but I think Thunder Dragon is relatively safe. It'll be like Salamangreat in my opinion, maybe a slight hit, but nothing probably super major. Okay, the last deck we'll talk about with this segment is Pendulum Magician or Endymion. I think this deck is one that is on the fringes of a tier 1 deck, so we have to talk about it. You know, since Pendulum is still going to be kind of hurt a little bit with this update to Master Rule 4, and other things like Xyz, Synchros, and Fusion will be a little bit more viable, I don't necessarily think it's going to become a clear top runner. It might be one that's hurt by this update to Master Rule 4. So a card like Servant of Endymion would be a good hit for this. I don't think it'll be outright banned, but maybe a limit to that card as well. I don't think we're going to see a lot of outright bans with this new Forbidden and Limit list, but maybe a couple like we talked about with Orkest and Striker, but I don't think we're going to see a lot. Maybe a good amount of limiting, but we'll see. Okay, so now as we move on to this next segment, let's talk about some other cards that aren't really deck specific, but maybe more splash and quite a few other things that might be hit. I think a card that should be hit would be a Floodgate card like There Can Be Only One. If not that one, maybe another card that kind of fits the bill. There Can Be Only One is super oppressive. And if you've got 3 of them in your deck, you have a likelihood of drawing it that makes it, hard to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And, that's kind of what it should be about, is being able to play the game. You shouldn't be able to just lock your opponent out turn 1 and then they just have to scoop. So I can see There Can Be Only One, maybe limited, maybe not banned, but maybe limited. If you've only got 1, then you've got, in a 40-card deck, a pretty low chance of getting it on your first hand. So you can at least play some, and then hopefully establish some negates or some back row or something like that. Another card that I think makes a lot of sense to maybe limit would be Super Polymerization. We've seen this card go through some weird stages in 2019. It went from being limited to semi-limited to unlimited in consecutive ban lists, and then it wasn't touched in the October ban list. Now, this is a card that's pretty generically good because so many cards are dark-based, so many decks, rather, are dark-based, along with the fact that you can't respond to the card. So, you can do it, and if you're playing Thunder Dragon, if you're playing Orkest, if you're playing a bunch of different decks, you can summon a card like Starving Venom Fusion Dragon super easily. So this could be a problem that I can see it going back to being limited, because then, you have no guarantee of having it. The only reason it might not get touched is if they see this as a way against those decks. So it kind of depends on what Konami's purview on this card is. If they don't touch this card, at least do something like Starving Venom. I don't know if banning it's the right call, but even Starving Venom's not the only target. You've got Mud Dragon, you've got Predaplant, there's other things that are generic Super Poly targets. So I think Super Poly could reasonably be limited again, and we'll see how that goes. If they semi-limit it, that's kind of dumb, but when it was semi-limited back in April, it didn't really change how people were playing it, because when it's 2, you can't necessarily count on it, so that's that. Okay, so then I want to talk about, the next card I want to talk about is a card like Mystic Mine, which a lot of people really hate. But since it's not seen at a super high level in the top decks, I actually think it's probably fine. The worst I could see it happening is being limited, but it's a pretty degenerate card, but since it's not there at that top cut of decks, I don't think we're going to see it a lot. Occasionally we do see it in like a top 16 or something, but, I think it's probably fine. Finally, before I go into our last little segment on this, I want to talk about the Guard Dragon cards. So, some people, I see a lot of people on Twitter, on YouTube, still saying that we need to ban Guard Dragon LP. The Guard Dragon combo was killed on the last ban list when you banned Agripane. Agripane was the key piece that splashed a extra deck monster onto the field. You can then link them off and have another thing. It was degenerate, it was crazy, it was used all the time. So they banned Agripane, and then you don't see it used as much. Some people still don't like LP because once you set it up, you can still then get another monster on the field, but we have all kinds of cards that do a similar thing. So LP is not a problem. Plus, people are not really using the Guard Dragon combo competitively anymore. I just want people to stop complaining about this card. It's not that bad. Agripane, for sure, but LP, nah. Okay, and then the thing I want to look at is some cards that might go from being more restricted or even banned to being put into play some. So we come up with a few listed cards here at TTD that we'll talk about. The first of which I'm going to talk about is Raigeki. Raigeki is a generally pretty decent card. You can target your opponent's monsters and get rid of them. Right now it's limited. Back in the day when there wasn't a lot you could do about it, yeah, I see why it was limited. But now there's all kinds of decks that have a bunch of negates and things like that. Raigeki's not that much of a good card. Also, we're going to see, people, I think if you bring it up to 3, people aren't going to change how they play. I have one in my side deck, and I don't ever use it almost. So Raigeki's a card that I think you can unlimit it, and it would be fine. So we'll see if that happens. We've seen it happen with like Solemn Judgment and Super Poly going from being limited or unlimited or limited or banned to being unlimited. So we'll see. But I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. Okay, a few more cards. First, Harpy's Feather Duster, a pretty good back row destruction card. This card is currently at 1 in the OCG, so I think since we do tend to follow what they do sometimes, this card could go to 1 here as well. We'll see. I don't think if it's at 1, it's that degenerate. I mean, we have all kinds of cards, like I said, that have negate, stuff like that. Plus, not a lot of decks run a lot of back row. So, Harpy's Feather Duster, I think could go to 1 and be just fine. Final card is Max C. This, of course, is a card people love to talk about. Max C's been banned for a good minute now, and ultimately, I don't think this card's ever coming off. You know, some people are saying, you know, maybe in the format right now, it's just fine. But the thing is, with Max C, you know, you play a deck like Salamangreat, you're going through so much of your deck, you've got every card you want. Max C's not coming off the ban list. We'll see, you know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but ultimately I don't think that card's coming off the ban list. Okay, that'll conclude our video for today. We'll see a new ban list here in, again, about a week and a half or 2 weeks, probably. We'll have a reaction to that, and we'll see how close we were and how off we were. If you think we missed anything, please let us know down in the comments. And until next time, guys, stay tuned to TCD Duelist, and have a great day.